Welcome to a journey into the dawn of modern thought. Today we explore the visionary in the dark, a deep dive into the life and legacy of Roger Bacon, known to history as the Doctor Mirabilis, or Wonderful Teacher. Living in an era dominated by tradition, Bacon dared to look more closely, ultimately laying the groundwork for the advent of experimental science. Through his revolutionary work in optics, mathematics, and empirical observation, he challenged the status quo and fundamentally altered how humanity perceives the world. Let's step out of the intellectual darkness of the medieval mind and examine the sparks of curiosity that ignited a scientific revolution.
Here, we confront the dual identity of Roger Bacon, contrasting myth with historical reality. On the left, we explore the legend of the sorcerer. Popularized by Elizabethan dramatists, the myth painted Bacon as a dangerous alchemist and necromancer. He was rumored to possess forbidden knowledge and to have built a mechanical brazen head capable of predicting the future. On the right, we meet the historical polymath. The reality reveals an English nobleman turned Franciscan friar and a brilliant scholar at Oxford and Paris. Driven by an apocalyptic urgency to reform Christian education, Bacon was actually a pioneering advocate for mathematics and empirical observation, the true foundations of natural philosophy. This slide traces the path of the polymath, mapping Roger Bacon's intellectual journey across medieval Europe. It begins at Oxford, his foundation. Born to a wealthy family ruined by civil revolt, Bacon studied the liberal arts, deeply influenced by Robert Grosseteste's linguistic and optical works. His journey then moves to Paris in the 1240s, where he became a master lecturing on Aristotle's newly recovered, previously banned scientific texts. After likely teaching at Oxford, he returned to Paris in the 1250s, immersing himself in language, mathematics, optics, and the pseudo-Aristotelian Secretum Secretorum. Finally, around 1256, Bacon entered the Franciscan order. This period of confinement and declining reputation ultimately drove him to seek external patronage to realize his grand vision of universal science. This slide illustrates a rupture in medieval thought, comparing traditional scholasticism with Roger Bacon's revolutionary paradigm, scientia experimentalis. First, regarding the source of truth, scholasticism relied strictly on texts, established doctrine, and ancient authority. Bacon broke away, championing direct physical observation and mathematical proof. Second, their methodology differed significantly. While traditionalists used deductive logic and dialectical debate, Bacon introduced inductive testing, physical instruments, and language mastery. Finally, their ultimate goal reveals a massive shift. Scholasticism sought theological disputation and academic consensus. In contrast, Bacon's paradigm focused on practical utility, technological advancement, and the betterment of the Christian commonwealth, setting a bold new course for human knowledge. This slide captures the papal catalyst and the race against time, a burning fuse of historical drama. It begins with the Mandate in June 1266, when Pope Clement IV secretly ordered Bacon to send his proposed Encyclopedia of Unified Science, completely unaware that the work didn't yet exist. What followed was the execution. Flying entirely under the radar of his strict Franciscan superiors and completely lacking funds or a proper laboratory, Bacon pulled off an absolute miracle of literary productivity. In just 18 months, he penned over 1 million words across 3 massive volumes to provide a blueprint for educational reform. Tragically, this race ended in the tragedy. Pope Clement IV died in November 1268, likely before ever fully reading or acting upon Bacon's monumental submission. This slide breaks down the architecture of the Opus trilogy, the monumental 3-volume submission Roger Bacon sent to the Pope. At the foundation sits the Opus Majus, the greater work. This work is his massive, 800-plus page master blueprint, a persuasive preamble demanding a total overhaul of the university curriculum by integrating sciences and languages into theology. Building upon that is the Opus Minus, the lesser work. Serving as a summary and supplement, this condensed volume clarifies his primary arguments while introducing specific treatises on practical alchemy and calendar reform. At the apex stands the Opus Tertium, the third work. Intended as a critical preliminary guide to precede the others, it expands on physical science, semiotics, and the core moral imperatives driving his grand project. This slide breaks down the 7 structural segments required for unlocking the Opus Majus, Roger Bacon's masterwork. It begins with the causes of error, offendicula, a clearing of the mind, followed by philosophy and theology, which harmonizes pagan wisdom with divine revelation. Next, biblical languages, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, ensure accurate translation, while mathematics is the key to understanding nature and calendar reform. The scientific core features optics, perspectiva, tracking the physical propagation of light and force, and experimental science, scientia experimentalis, the supreme methodology for verifying all claims. Finally, it culminates in moral philosophy, the ultimate ethical application of knowledge for the betterment of society. This slide introduces the 4 causes of error, offendicula, crumbling pillars that Roger Bacon argued we must destroy to build a lasting commonwealth of true knowledge. On the left, we see the first 2 destructive forces, unworthy authority, which demands blind submission to flawed or misinterpreted texts, and custom, the unthinking continuation of historical traditions. On the right, we find the remaining 2 pillars of ignorance. Popular opinion, following the prejudices of the uneducated masses, and pretended knowledge, concealing academic ignorance behind empty rhetorical displays. By shattering these 4 pillars, humanity can finally rebuild upon the glowing foundation, scientia experimentalis, the bedrock of mathematical verification and direct physical observation. This slide introduces the geometry of reality, perspectiva, showcasing Roger Bacon's groundbreaking work in optics. First, the concept details how Bacon elevated optics from a niche study into a primary science, heavily influenced by Islamic scholar Al-Hazen, Ibn al-Haytham, and Robert Grosseteste. Next, the breakthrough highlights his experimental focus. Bacon meticulously mapped the anatomy of the eye and the brain, studying light, distance, mirrors, and lenses. Finally, the core thesis states that natural agents act through the propagation of their likenesses. Because light travels and refracts according to strict mathematical laws, Bacon concluded that all physical phenomena can only be truly understood through the rules of geometry. This slide breaks down the mathematics of time, calendar drift, highlighting Roger Bacon's incredible astronomical foresight. First, the flaw explains that the Julian calendar wrongly assumed a solar year lasted exactly 365.25 days. Bacon calculated that the actual tropical year was closer to 365.2422 days. Next, the math reveals a subtle but devastating error. 365.25 minus 365.2422 is equal to 0.0078 days of error per year. This led directly to the crisis. The calendar was drifting 1 full day every 125 years. By the 1260s, the vernal equinox had slipped 9 days since the Council of Nicaea, meaning the Church was celebrating Easter on the completely wrong date. Finally, the solution: Bacon petitioned the Pope to drop 1 day every 125 years, a brilliant mathematical calculation that precisely foreshadowed the 1582 Gregorian reform. This slide explores the 2 spheres of experience, breaking down Roger Bacon's philosophy of how humans acquire knowledge. On the left, we have experientia, the external. This sphere is sensory, physical, and shared with animals. Gathered through the 5 senses and physical instruments, its output is philosophical knowledge and the verification of physical laws. On the right, we find experimentum, the internal. This sphere is spiritual, inner, and entirely unique to the human soul. Received via divine illumination, its output provides foundational scientific inspiration and moral theology. Ultimately, the synthesis reveals Bacon's core belief: true science requires both the divine spark to inspire inquiry and physical observation to verify it. Welcome to the ultimate realization of Roger Bacon's vision, prophecies of applied science. Bacon firmly believed that theoretical knowledge must yield practical technologies to defend and elevate human civilization. Centuries ahead of his time, he left us with 4 astonishing technological predictions. First, he was the first European to record the exact chemical formula for gunpowder, niter, sulfur, and charcoal, recognizing its explosive military potential. Second, in optics and lenses, he conceptualized using lenses to magnify the microscopic and observe distant celestial bodies, foreshadowing the telescope. Furthermore, he envisioned mechanized transport, describing horseless carriages and oarless boats. Finally, in aeronautics, he dreamed of flying machines operated by men flapping artificial wings, proving his mind truly lived in the future. Today, we conclude our exploration of Roger Bacon's legacy by examining the three dignities of experimental science, his revolutionary meta-framework for how science must operate to drive human progress. First, we have Dignity 1, verification. Science does not merely accept theories, it actively tests, verifies, or refutes claims through rigorous, direct observation. Next, Dignity 2, utility reminds us that science is not purely academic. It must create practical technologies, medicines, and arts to actively better the human condition. Finally, Dignity 3, independent inquiry establishes science as a sovereign mode of investigation, discovering nature's deepest secrets entirely free from traditional theological deduction, cementing a permanent foundation for modern scientific discovery. We have arrived at the grand conclusion of our journey, the bridge to the modern world. Here, we span the massive chasm separating medieval theology from modern science. First, consider the reality of the man. Roger Bacon was no dark sorcerer, he was a devout Franciscan friar armed with an apocalyptic urgency to defend Christendom with the ultimate weapon, truth. Next, we uncover the true legacy. By insisting that the physical world can be decoded through mathematics, and that theory must always bow to observation, Bacon established the methodological bedrock of empirical science. Ultimately, our final takeaway reveals a visionary trapped in the dark. His illuminated blueprint for human knowledge lay dormant for centuries, quietly waiting for the rest of the world to catch up.